and welcome to Bulgaria. Founded in the 7th century, Bulgaria is one of the oldest countries on the European continent, but it's one of the EU's youngest members, celebrating its 10th anniversary this year. EU membership hasn't been the magic solution for corruption or economic problems that many Bulgarians hoped, and a new president who took office this month hopes to improve relations with Russia. Bulgaria, of course, was ruled by communism until 1989, or the era of socialism, as this museum calls it. The Museum of Socialist Art has some 77 statues of Soviet-era leaders in its gardens outside, with more communist art to be discovered inside.
The exhibition currently being shown at the Socialist Art Museum is named The Chieftain's Image. It contains official parade portraits and compositions representing the main communist leaders of that period. The concept of this exhibition is to show the evolution of that image, the progression of the leader in figurative art.
Let's turn our attention to Bulgaria's present and indeed its future. We've come to the second largest city in the country, to Plovdiv, a thriving university town, and indeed we're at the University of Food Technology, where we're joined by the country's Vice President, Ms. Iliana Yotova. Ms. Yotova, thanks so much for taking time to meet with us. Now, before you became Vice President, took office this January, you were, of course, Bulgaria's MEP for the Socialists. 10 years on, Bulgarians as optimistic about the EU?
As you know, at the start there was huge euphoria, but now I have to say there is a certain suspicion, not towards Europe, but above all towards European institutions, because they didn't want to or were not able to solve the biggest crises in Europe at the moment.
There is economic growth in Bulgaria to the tune of 3%, but yet per capita income is still less than half the EU average. Why?
It's not easy to make the transition from the economy we had under communism, that is to say, a planned economy, to the market economy. At the start, it was a pretty brutal privatization. We closed down a lot of factories and big companies, but nothing was created to take its place.
There's even more Bulgarians working abroad. There's something like 2.5 million Bulgarians working abroad, 2.2 million in the workforce here. Is that a problem for Bulgaria?
Yes, our biggest problem is demographics. There are a lot of young Bulgarians who work abroad because the salaries are very low in Bulgaria and there aren't enough jobs here, so it's hard to motivate young people to stay.
Well, given that we're at the university, Ms. Yotova, I'll let you go and speak to some of the students to see what they think the future holds.
Bonjour, bonjour à tout le monde. Comment allez-vous?
I'm studying winemaking. For 6 months now, I've been in discussions with a Russian investor who wants to work with us here in Bulgaria with Bulgarian wine using Bulgarian grapes. And they want to export that wine to Russia. But on the other hand, Bulgaria isn't well known by French investors. But somehow, Romania is.
Yeah, I think we need to do more in terms of advertising. There isn't enough of it in Europe. There are people in Europe who know nothing at all about our country.
Are there new funds or projects from the EU that will lead to investment in research, for example, in Bulgaria?
I have to say today I am worried, to be honest. We're now talking about changing the way aid is given to countries.
Now, a student, a winemaker, felt that his future market was more Russia rather than the EU itself. Bulgaria has a very different past with Russia when you compare it to other countries in the region, doesn't it? Your relations always remained quite close. There's not the same hostility, if you like.
I think that when we talk about the free market, you need to benefit from all options, not just the European side. We are a small country. How can we compete with French or Spanish wine? It's impossible. But on the other hand, we have good relations with Russia, and that needs to continue.
Well, indeed, Russian interests account for 20% of Bulgaria's economy, notably dominant in the energy sector, but also, as our reporter Luke Brown finds out, a lot of houses and holiday homes along the coast of the Black Sea also being snapped up by Russians. Let's take a look.
The atmosphere is distinctly Russian at this restaurant in Sofia. Tonight, the crowd have come to celebrate the Russian Christmas. These diners have little doubt. For many Bulgarians, Russia is a faithful ally, a fact their own politicians should not forget.
We're of the same Slavic blood. We're Orthodox Christians, like them.
Russia is the best possible friend for Bulgaria. It's proved that closeness down the centuries. We've always had very friendly relations. That's despite the stupidity of the former president or our politicians.
Russia is more than just a friend. For some, it's a vital economic actor. This estate agent in Burgas sells largely to Russians. There are 100,000 who have bought properties on the Black Sea coast. Russians often have deeper pockets than Bulgarian buyers.
This property's location is great, in the middle of Burgas. Its selling price is 75,000 euros. It's a great deal for buying or renting.
For Konstantin Shugarov, doing business with Russians means hoping global affairs does not interfere with his business.
Politics certainly has an influence on real estate. I have close friends who are Russian who ask me why Bulgarian politicians are distancing themselves from Russia. I'm sure that it's having an influence on the number of Russian buyers and Russian tourists in Bulgaria.
Two of Konstantin's Russian clients have been settled in Bulgaria for 3 years. Vladimir and Olga split their time between their home here in Burgas and Moscow. They see Bulgaria as a little like an extension of their homeland.
If we ask them to speak slowly, we understand everything.
We have the same soul. That's what counts. It's not the language that counts, it's what happens inside. Normal people don't distance themselves from Russia. It's the Bulgarian politicians that are doing that. That's just world events. When relations between the USA and Russia improve again, we'll all be friends again.
Russia's role in the Bulgarian economy is far from passive. This is the Russian-owned Oil Refinery. It's the biggest in the Balkans. Along with Lukoil's distribution arm, they're the biggest companies in Bulgaria, representing around 9% of GDP. Russian companies dominate Bulgaria's energy supplies, controlling the gas and nuclear sectors. In January 2009, a trade dispute saw Moscow cut the gas supply to Eastern Europe and demonstrated Bulgaria's energy dependence. That leverage ensuring Sofia has little choice but to toe the line.
Bulgarian politicians have been falling in line with Russian strategic interests at the expense of Bulgarians. Every time a Bulgarian prime minister, president, or whoever makes a statement about keeping up the sanctions on Russia, there's been a reaction. There's always been the threat of severing, gas deliveries, of Lukoil moving out, of Bulgarian being left out in the cold.
Bulgaria's cultural and religious ties to Russia go back centuries and were heightened during the Cold War. In the past decade and a half, Bulgaria joined both the EU and NATO. Now, caught between East and West, Bulgaria will have to balance those rivals to keep its destiny in its own hands.
A quick glimpse there at Russia's physical presence in Bulgaria. Bulgaria's new president, Rumen Dimitrov, took office this month. He says he wants to improve relations with Russia further, all the while maintaining that his country remains very much pro the European Union. We went to meet him. For former chief of the Bulgarian Air Force, now President Mr. Rumen Dimitrov. Thanks so much for taking time to talk to us. A decade after membership, once again, it hasn't been the boost to the economy that maybe Bulgaria had hoped for 10 years ago. What's more, certain measures taken by the EU have had a negative effect on the Bulgarian economy, notably these sanctions that it has slapped on Russia since 2004. You want to see those sanctions lifted?
Разбира се, че искаме да видим тези санкции.
Quite naturally would like to see those sanctions lifted.
Вреда нанасят тези санкции на Русия.
We know that as much damage as they cause to Russia, they cause just as much damage to the European countries. Both sides are losing here.
Now, you were elected as an independent candidate, really backed by the socialists. So maybe you have new ideas of how the EU can then react to, for example, things like the annexation of Crimea, which is why the EU put those sanctions in place. How do you feel about that annexation of Crimea today? I mean, do you think it's irreversible at this stage, or do you think the EU still needs to put pressure on Russia?
Мисля, че по този въпрос трябва да има повече реализъм.
I think on that matter we need to be more realistic and pragmatic.
Крим е украински.
To Europe, the Crimea is Ukrainian. It is on the Ukrainian map. De facto, it's Russian. And we can't possibly neglect the reality that there's a Russian flag in Crimea. And this is the reality. The future of Crimea will be decided by the people of Crimea. The question we have to ask is whether the people of Crimea would like to go back to Ukraine. This is not an insignificant question.
You've decided to bring us to see this company, a very large one, that's called Optics.
Je pense que c'est le futur de mon pays parce que
I think this type of company is the future of my country. They've gained a lot from EU projects. They make lenses that are used in military equipment and by police forces.
One of the many things produced here is that lens that allows for night vision, and even heat sensors can see that body heat, notably being used to control the borders along Bulgaria to try and spot those migrants arriving. That is something Bulgaria seems incredibly concerned with at the moment, even if most of the migrants, most of the refugees simply want to pass through Bulgaria.
Bulgaria, my country, has the responsibility for the security not just for our own citizens, but for all of Europe. Europe has failed to find a satisfactory solution to the migration and refugee crisis. The relocation system and the idea of quotas simply don't work.
Ça ne marche pas.
Ms. Yotova, thanks so much for your time. We turn now from one type of lens to a very different one. Have you ever heard of the new Boyana Studios? They're located just outside Sofia and produce hundreds of Hollywood blockbusters every year. Indeed, since 2007, it's run by an American company. Bruce Willis, Sylvester Stallone, they've all been there. And now our reporter brings us to take a visit.
This is New York. One step away from our Middle Eastern street, where we shoot many different action scenes.
In just a few steps, you can travel the world, all without leaving the suburbs of Sofia. Welcome to the new Boyana Studios.
With our craftsmen, we can build almost everything. The St. Paul cathedrals.
The scenery extends into the distance. London, Manhattan, Rome, everything needed to make cinematic history.
We are at the largest wardrobe in the Balkan Peninsula.
Some of these costumes were created over 50 years ago. They appeared in the biggest films from the communist era. Over 600 movies emerged from these studios, ranging from Soviet propaganda pieces to patriotic epics, glorifying Bulgaria's national heroes. Lazar Lazarov has been working here for 47 years. He keeps the equipment, new and old, in top condition.
It still turns round, so it's still working.
Lazar still retains a certain nostalgia for the studio's past glories.
Point of view of the dock.
Before 1989, the state invested large sums of money to make monumental films. Films that had huge artistic and historic ambitions. As a Bulgarian, I feel great pride and joy in taking part in these works of art. They were films that were made with great values.
But times have changed. Now it's American productions rather than socialist propaganda that rule the roost. The studio was privatized a decade ago, snapped up by a Californian company. Since then, the roster is full of action films and series. The studio's strength, its high production standards, all for a low budget. It can also boast a 400-strong permanent workforce that can be boosted to 2,000 for the really big productions. For the American boss Yariv Lerner, that's why Bulgarwood is increasingly becoming a destination of choice for Hollywood.
How are you doing? Good to see you.
Good.
We got some good movies coming up this year.
Got some big stuff coming
Some big stuff, yeah.
Equally important, New Boyana can provide an all-in-one service to US filmmakers.
You know, you can shut down roads here or get amazing locations for relatively little bureaucracy. We work very well with the government here as well. And we've been around for long enough that, you know, when you tell them that you want to land a helicopter on top of a building, they don't find it odd, which a lot of people would.
These studios have witnessed much of Bulgaria's cinematic history, from communist propaganda to Hollywood action blockbusters, and now to commercial advertisements. A lucrative sideline, 50 were made here last year alone.
Well, that brings us to the end of the first half, but join us again after the news when we'll be taking a closer look at that migration question, and you'll also see that beneath the glistening white snow, Bulgaria is battling a pollution problem.